You know, something that I found out the other day, I've thought a few times in my life, is people are a lot lighter than you think they should be when you pick them up. As some of you may or may not know, our family does taekwondo mixed with some martial art, other MMA sort of stuff inside of it. And a couple weeks ago, we were in the middle of it, and we do this thing, and we call it the Randori Ring, which also we call it the Ring of Death, but depending on the situation. It's a fun thing. I think it's fun. It's kind of one of my favorite things that we get to do. But a couple weeks ago, we were doing it, and there's several adults there with us, and it's so much fun when there's adults there. So we're going through it, and big guy comes up to me, and I get the gun from him, and I'm, take it back, and I'm like, this was really fun and exciting. Next guy comes up, and he and I spar every Friday night for the last 2 years. So we get to be around each other all the time doing fun stuff. Well, he comes up to me, and he jumps to try to get me, and I pick him up, and I'm holding him in the air, and I realize I'm just holding him off the ground. He's like 180 pounds, and I just kind of gently sit him on the ground, and he's like, I felt like a baby. That was the weirdest thing. It's like, you're just holding me, and I'm like, I should put you down now. So I'm sitting like, man, this was fun. This is really, I'm super amped up. I'm like, dude, this is so much fun. I've done all kinds of awesome stuff. And then I'm out. It's done with my turn in the middle. And my wife comes up. She's like, man, that was a lot of fun. Can you show me how you got the gun from them? So I try to show her real quick. I've got the practice gun. She's like, I can't do this. It doesn't work. And she's like, well, we turned out. She's like, I think it's because your hands are so much bigger than mine. I'm like, oh, that could be true. So I'm sitting there and holding the gun, and she's like, I think this would work better. So she grabs my wrist, knocks it to the side to clear it away, grabs with my other arm and pulls it down. And then you're always supposed to use a follow-up move. So she just pretends to throw her knee up into the air. Well, the problem was when she grabbed my arm with the other arm, she pulls me down like this. So I go down, and then she goes up a little bit. And instead of just pretending to throw a knee, she ended up making full contact, and I go down. So I'm sitting there like, oh, and everyone, all the little boys around are sitting there going, all I can hear is one big giant, oh, from all around the room, and the audience and everyone is just like, oh. So I went from thinking, my gosh, this is fun. I love picking people up and being able to throw them around. This is so cool, to literally just standing there leaning on my wife going, I can't move. Within 3 minutes. So, just a thing about that. But that kind of goes to show you sometimes when God puts us in situations, sometimes we get built up and we get torn back down again really fast. Today, we're talking about something that has something to do with that. We're talking about forgiveness. There's a lot of times when we feel like we're doing awesome things all the time, but there are times when even the best of us still screw up. We still get too big for our britches. We do different things and stuff like that. But we just got done with camp, a couple of little kid weeks of camp, and a lot of you guys had either kids out there with us or some of you adults went out there with us. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work. But what we were talking about out there, and I'm going to kind of go a little bit close to that, is we were talking about some forgiveness things. And one of the things that I wanted to share from all that is a parable that I changed a few things to bring it down for kids. But I also realized that the parable of that I'm going to be translating, and you guys can guess it probably halfway through, probably before that, we'll be able to see how they relate things to kids. But I realized that, some of you guys don't get to come to camp with us all the time, so I figured I'd just do it the same way and let you guys hear a little bit of what happens at camp, and it fits perfectly into the story of forgiveness anyways from Jesus. So what we're going to start out on is a parable about brother that comes up to his dad. Now he comes up to his dad and he says, Dad, you're getting old, but you just won't die for me. Can you please give me half your money so I can have my inheritance? And everyone knows the story. But when you're telling little kids, they don't always know the story. There's only 2 or 3 preacher's kids in there that are like, I know this story. So he comes up and says, can I have the money? I want to go do my thing, Dad. I'm tired of waiting around for you to die. I just want my money now. Can I just have it and go with it? So the father looks at him and says, okay, here's your money. Writes him a check, Kid takes it, cashes a check. He's like, all right, I'm out. He leaves. Decides he's going to go to the big city. He wants to become a famous YouTube star. So while he's working really hard to become a YouTube star and he's blowing all kinds of money, he's actually semi-successful and he's starting to rise to fame and everyone's starting to know this guy's name. But then a giant forest fire comes through and just burns down all of his stuff. His big thing he was getting ready to do, all of it's gone. All of his fame is gone, and there's all the food is gone because there was such a big fire that there's just no food and people can't get to stuff. So he's sitting there, he's like, man, I am so broke. He's run through all of his money now because he was just trying to live way outside of his means. And he comes and he's like, man, I'm just going to start cleaning up the parks like they did back in the Depression era, where he's like, I can go clean these. And there's got to be fast food wrappers or candy wrappers or something. So he goes around and he picks up the candy wrappers and just tries to eat the candy off the candy wrappers or find gum on the other side of benches or stuff like that. Pretty gross. And he goes through and he's gathering all these things and he's like, man, I can't find enough food to survive on with all this. This is just crazy. Then he's sitting there thinking about it while his stomach is growling. He's like, man, I haven't eaten in days. And thinks about it and he's like, you know, my dad, he's got a lot of employees and they work and they eat really well all the time. I should really go back to them and maybe he'll just hire me. Like, I don't deserve to be his son anymore, but maybe he'll just hire me and let me work for him. So he walks back because he's too broke to get an Uber or ride a bus or anything like that. So he just ends up walking. And he's got a lot of time to walk. And he's sitting there thinking about what he's going to say as he's walking back. And as he's walking and walking, he's thinking, I'm just going to just beg him just to forgive me, just to hire me. Just let me start at the bottom. I'll work my way up. Like, I don't deserve to be your son anymore. So he's been thinking this, planning to say all these things. And as he walks in, and his dad in the distance sees somebody walking, sees him, and he's like, and his dad runs to him and gives him a big, giant bear hug and picks him up and squeezes him and cracks his back and does all the fun dad hug things and puts him down. It's like, finally the kid's like, no, just hire me, Dad. I just want to be an employee for you. Just let me serve. Let me be anything. And Dad is like, no, son, you know that I love you. You're back with me. And he brings them back and he prepares a giant feast for them, which, footnote, if you ask little kids what their idea of a giant feast is usually something with spaghetti and either spaghetti pizza or spaghetti hamburgers, but definitely spaghetti. Kids like spaghetti. So he brings him home, makes him a giant spaghetti dinner, and everyone's super happy again. When you think about the story that is, and obviously that's the story of a lost son, but you have the time where we've all done things where we've went out and been a part of things that we thought were super important and didn't necessarily take God into consideration at all in any of the things we're doing. And this is just one of those times where it's a parable, so I kind of got to make it up for the little kids, and it was a lot of fun. But in the Bible, and that's definitely, you can see the parallels between it, Jesus gives lots of examples of this. In fact, there's another example that is a really good example when you see Peter in the Bible, and Jesus calling Peter. Now, Peter was Jesus' probably first disciple, at least in the first couple that he was calling, because there was a couple together when he was calling him. But in Luke 5, it goes a little bit like this. As the crowd was gathering and Jesus was preaching about it, he had to get out onto a boat, which you see happen a couple times in the Bible. Well, he gets out on this particular boat and he's talking to people, and he goes out on the boat so he can talk louder. They don't have churches and microphones and all the fun stuff that we have now, so they have to go out and use any sort of amplification they've got. So he's standing on the boat, and if you've ever been on a boat and talked in the water, you know that your voice travels forever, and you can hear everything that's happening around you. So Jesus is talking, and he gets on Peter's boat. So he finishes his sermon, his lesson and teaching for all the people that he's been doing it, and he says, hey, Peter, I know you didn't catch any fish last night. And then he says, let's go out into the deep water and let down your nets to catch what you can. So he says, well, I didn't catch anything all night, but Jesus, if you tell me to do this, I'm going to trust you. So he throws his net overboard, the side that Jesus tells him to, and they start pulling it up, and it starts to rip their nets. There's so much fish inside of it. So as he's pulling them up, they're like, hey, we need our partner boat to come out here. So they pull them up and put many boats inside of it that it starts to sink their little boats. Now, I know a lot of you guys don't I've actually taken a lot of people out here floating throughout the years. Thinking about putting enough stuff inside of a little boat to sink your boat, that's a lot of fish. When we think about fishing, we think about a little bit of fish, but enough to sink even a little kayak is a lot of stuff. So they're catching a lot, and he says to Peter, he's like, now, see how this, but now I'm going to make you a fisher of men. So Peter starts following Jesus, one of the first. James and John are both with him as well at that point. But so he's working and he's following Jesus. So he follows Jesus for years, right? Peter is an awesome guy. He's definitely one of the first ones called, and he's definitely serving Jesus with all of his heart. Time progresses, a couple years later progresses on, and they're talking with Jesus, and Jesus is asking them, who do people say that I am? And Peter responds, well, most of the time they respond, the others respond, well, some say that you're John the Baptist reincarnated. Some say that you're Elijah or Jeremiah or another prophet who's come back. And then Jesus looks at Peter and Peter says, well, Jesus, you're the Messiah. So Jesus says yes. Jesus agrees with him. Jesus confirms, it's like, this, Peter, you have got it. You're following. You're doing great. Peter's doing awesome, right? I had a story when I told all the kids too, but about how awesome Peter was. He's doing all kinds of awesome things. I mean, he's ready to die for Jesus. He's doing all the different stuff that he can do it. When the time comes of the Last Supper and Jesus is washing feet, he's washing all the disciples' feet. And when it comes to Peter's turn, Peter says, Jesus, you don't have to wash my feet. Well, I should be washing your feet. And God looks back and says, no, I have to wash your feet. You'll understand later what's going on here. But if you don't wash your feet, then you won't be with me. And so Peter's like, well, then don't just wash my feet. But Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head as well. This guy is all in for Jesus. He's working hard. He's trying hard. He's doing everything that he can. He is right there with him. A couple hours later, after that, he's like, all right, he's ready to die for Jesus. Jesus is getting taken by the temple guards, and Peter pulls out his sword and cuts off the guy's ear. Like, he is ready to go for all of this. He is ready to die for Jesus. But Jesus says, no, this is my time. This is what I'm here for. Peter doesn't understand, obviously. He doesn't have the rest of the story. So Jesus picks up the ear and puts it back on and tells Peter to put his sword away. And as they're going through it, they get separated. But Peter is following as close as he can. He gets to the courthouse and where all the stuff is happening. And he's sitting there. And this is Peter. Peter, who is so strong, ready to die for him just hours before. One of the girls, who was one of the palace officials' servants, comes up and says, I know who you are. You're one of Jesus' followers, aren't you? And Jesus says, nah, you got me confused with somebody else. Peter says, did I say Jesus? Peter says, you got me confused with someone else. So he walks off. And then it's cold. He comes around the thing. The same girl comes back and brings one of her friends with her and says, see, this is one of Jesus' followers, isn't it? And Peter says, no, it's not. I'm absolutely not one of Jesus' followers. Leave me alone. And uses some strong language and pushes them away. And then at that moment, Jesus looks at him across everything. And Peter realizes he had just denied Jesus 3 times. Peter, the rock, one of the first disciples, willing to die for Jesus, just hours before, just denied Jesus completely and utterly at a place where he could still see Jesus standing in trial just a ways away, which is a crazy thing to think, right? A little bit later, Peter comes back. Jesus comes back. Jesus rises again. He's back with his disciples. He sees Peter, and they're talking, and they're working together. So when they're together after this all time, after he's denied Jesus, he's done all of these things. He's working, and he's trying to get back. Peter is Peter. Peter's the rock. Peter decided he was going to just be strong and go right back to where he was at. But Jesus remembered these things. So he comes back to Peter later on and comes to him and says, after they had eaten breakfast together, after Jesus had risen, after the time had come that Jesus was with them back again as the resurrected Messiah, and he says, when they had eaten breakfast, he asked Peter, do you love me more than these people? Yes, Lord, Jesus said to them. You know that I love you. Peter was able to come back and be talking with Jesus after he had been apart and been away from him. Then he did it again. Jesus, do you love me? The second time, they said, feed my lambs. Then a third time, Peter, do you love me? Then shepherd my sheep. Jesus was able to forgive sorry guys, I'm getting nervous and I'm starting to talk too fast. Jesus was able to forgive Peter multiple times for the times that he was denied him. Jesus was taking him back and explaining to him, even though he forgives all of us, there are so many things that we get to do that we can sin against God's plan for us. When we think about it, every one of us can come up to think about things that we have done to go against God's plan for us. We've got so many things that we get to do that we do all the time. Do we put our faith in money? Do we put our faith in the things around us? Do we take our own athleticism, our own abilities to go out and just do the things that we do, to shoot hoops, to do different things that we do? All of these things are not God's plan for us, but they're things that we do regularly that God is able to forgive us for. Things like, how many of you guys have been in a situation where instead of immediately turning for God, you think, I can handle this? It's a very, very common, very American situation that we find ourselves in all the time, where we're like, oh, I can just do this. Maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. But that's not what God calls us to do. What God calls us to do is to turn to Him in all of our things. The more that we turn to God in all of the small things, the medium things, the big things, instead of just the giant things, the more you see that God is using us and will teach you and will use you for all the different situations that you're in, regardless of the difficulty and the level of them. He's equipped us for the stuff that we need to do when we need to do it. So, when you think about forgiveness, when you think about how God has forgiven us, and He's been able to take us and all of the crazy things that we've been inside of, and He's forgiven us for them. While many of us haven't done as much as denied God to His face, like Peter did, there are tons of things that we've done that we need to ask forgiveness for as well. And when you're thinking about asking God for forgiveness, think also too about the other people around you who are asking for forgiveness, and that we should forgive them as well. There are many, many times and situations where we are working through, where a lot of times the people that we're remembering things and we're holding grudges against aren't the people that are the people that God has already forgiven, that we aren't doing anything besides just holding a grudge against them for no reason other than ourselves. So, in the Lord's Prayer, it says, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. When we talk about forgiveness, you can never just think about, oh man, I do these things, God needs to forgive me. But if you're not willing to forgive others, then you're not willing to move through the situations that God has put you through. It is greater to forgive others than it is to be forgiven. So, okay. As we get ready to dismiss, like to pray for our thing, call the band back up. Remember, God calls you to be a person of His family, which is a harder thing in today's world, because the idea of a family is not as strong as it was thousands of years ago when all of these things were written. But when you look around the room, you see the people that are sitting there, the grandparents, the parents, the great-grandparents, aunts, uncles. We get to be called a family of God together, and we are to forgive each other and to love and honor each other. Thank you, guys. We'll pray for our thing.